World Trigger's reboot has not only been a major topic on my mind, but also for the community. With it being one of the most unexpected surprises to come from recent announcements, there's bound to be a lot of things on people's minds regarding the circumstances around it and how much higher it will aim to please in comparison to our original run. As we wait in the waiting room, now is the perfect time to not only discuss what we know, but also what we should consider. A mix of not only public information, but also perspective, as I have quite a few things to get off my chest personally. But before going any further, the first question to answer is, what is the reboot? To put it simply, for those who are just now finding out or they are still unsure exactly what it means, we're getting the content of season 1 with the fresh coat of paint that we saw within the jump of quality within season 2 and 3. That is it, nothing more or less. So that means from the moment we saw Jin save Mikumo all the way to the evening round 5 was about to begin and Gallipola invaded, everything in between them is fair game. Black Trigger retrieval after Crater invasion round 1 through 4. We should expect to see these things again. I had a lot of people on my initial video talking about the reboot thinking it was gonna readapt season 2 and 3, and I'll be honest, that makes zero sense. Season 1 is the only part of the anime right now that is technically lagging in the quality retention, so I can understand the mindset of wanting to have a full consistent release of content that is going to be the standard for the long term, even if it means going back and redoing season 1. That isn't to say that the original run should be disrespected, because for what it's worth, I had an absolute blast with it back when I was in middle school. After all, I'm pretty sure it was the one thing that got all of us here in the first place. Keeping it real here, we know how people treat animation these days, especially knowing the bar of what people feel is acceptable. Getting the anime community to genuinely try the anime knowing they have to get through season 1 is a reasonably tough sell these days. Of course, we could just say read the manga and hop on the anime after chapter 122, but more than often, folks like to preserve a purely anime-only experience. With that in mind, I do want to take a moment to talk about the circumstances around season 1. Truth be told, growing up, I did not hear a lot about production information about season 1, but there has been some light shed by Sakuga1, who is one of the many informative accounts about different series within the community. The link to this thread about World Trigger will be in the description, but the following are things to consider about the overall validity of this reboot. The thread starts off by saying that before explaining how World Trigger changed staff and became a show of qualities, we have to remember the unfortunate season 1. We had the veteran Mitsuru Hongo directing 48 episodes and the promising Koji Ogawa directing the last 24. However, the schedule for that project was a disaster, and I've said this time and time again, but talent without time is death. You're going to end up having an inconsistent project, and on top of having two people leading different sections of the show, a tight schedule being the cherry on top really set the first season back more than any of us may have realized at the time of its initial airing. Everything was against this project. Hongo didn't create a visually creative project, and Ogawa didn't find himself in the direction either. In 2014, Toei was a studio far inferior to what it is today. World Trigger was a long production anime with little time. Everything wrong. I'll be honest, it's not often you can see a lot of series put up things One Piece was doing. Even among low moments, the series still had enough structure to keep going all these years until it finally turned seasonal with Elbaf. Though in 2014 we may not have been considering as much within the presentation as we do now, we can clearly see the limitations, the lack thereof, and of course the rough pacing that would really set people off had it still been an issue with our latest seasons. Thankfully, in season 2 and 3, they crunched it down to feel normal. Come 2021, 5 years after the end of the first season, and fortunately, many changes and improvements. Now the project was no longer a long production one. It would feature the excellent Morio Hatano as director and many talented animators. World Trigger will become a great action anime. The way One Piece had a jump in quality from Whole Cake to Wano and Dragon Ball did from Super to Broly, it only makes sense that World Trigger would end up joining the fray. Looking at the results, it's pretty self-explanatory. I feel like nobody would argue that the jump of quality was well delivered. Come season 2 and 3 is when I started first making content, and I felt more inclined to promote the series knowing it had the sauce that would make people stick around. First off, the aesthetic changes were impressive, with Hatano as series director, a new color designer, and new cinematographer Rumiko Nagai and Yuichiro Nagata respectively. World Trigger started to feature cooler colors. Above you can see season 1 and below season 2 and 3. It's a night and day difference. I don't think I really need to say much here, especially knowing just how kitted out the presentation prediction was for round 8. These aesthetic changes were very important because World Trigger is a science fiction story, so digital effects and neon blend perfectly with the work. A true statement because nowadays people especially talk about composition and lighting. I know people miss the aesthetic of how Tryon used to look, but all things considered, it really has worked out. One goes on to say, and what made this become such a solid action anime was the range of animators they had, starting with Yuya Takahashi, who at the time had just become a star of Dragon Ball. Here as Chief Animation Director, or abbreviated as Chief AD, he animated and mainly corrected many scenes. For those who aren't familiar with Takahashi, they have quite a well-rounded resume, working on series from Fairy Tail, One Piece naturally being part of Toei, and Dragon Ball from pretty much multiple corners from Super to Broly. He's got a bit of a Noatoshi Shida charm within his animation, but also a good mix of things like smears and cool ideas in general. They are just one of the many big contributors to the second and third season, and don't even get me started on the MVP Akihiro Ota, who has such a major amount of output for World Trigger that they practically feel like what Jason Yao was from My Hero Academia, which funny enough is one's next point. A little before Akihiro Ota became one of the favorite animators in the One Piece fandom, he became one in World Triggers. In particular, he formed an unbeatable duo with Go Koga, one of Toei's best directors. The duo provided impressive moments. With that, World Trigger had everything. Its series director and episode directors understood a great deal about how to create strategic, thrilling, and very well animated fights. They worked very well with the scale of the battles, the tension in every action. Simply incredible. That being said, the work's action is quite unique. The author developed many rules and features for the action, along with a protagonist who isn't strong but rather strategic. In other words, the anime's fights needed to be very well crafted. Fortunately, this staff found the answer. This right here is why I am a firm believer that World Trigger is one of the few shonen series that deserves to be mentioned next to Hunter x Hunter. I strongly feel like Ashihara and Togashi put their heart and soul into crafting and expanding upon their technical foundations with the power system so thoroughly that every fight feels like a special thrill. While one series capitalizes on narration to connect the play-by-play, the other capitalizes on a mix of both live commentary and real-time strategy that makes you feel like you're watching the greatest esport of all time. It's something truly unique that no other series has, and in which allows it to continue to thrive in a lane uncontested. Pulling back into the staff, even Koji Ogawa, director of the final part of the first season, had his chance to return to a better World Trigger. He directed episode 12 of the second season and 1, 4, and 12 of the third, which were great. FYI, just because we had an overall leadership change doesn't exactly mean those talents are gone. Ogawa and Hongo have as much part of a play in the adaptation as they did in season 1, even in different positions. And it's my hope that they use this reboot to get their payback essentially and go further beyond than what they could before, especially when they were the ones spearheading this era of content. Now it seems that the next step for the franchise is to correct the mistakes of the first season and restart the project in anime. The question remains whether its staff will do justice to what season 2 and 3 accomplished, but I want to believe that this will be the gateway the work deserves. Perfectly said, because that's all I want. For this reboot to be the gateway for the series to take its second chance on the world for overlooking it in the first place. I may sound a bit hypocritical here, given I'm always one of the first people to try and reason with the fact that not everyone is gonna find that gem we all like, but damn it, I want Ashihara to get his flowers so unbelievably bad with this reboot. For all that he perseveres through, he is somebody that deserves them, and so much more than at least the Western anime world has given him. Of course, the main question everyone has on their minds now is when. At the time of this video, we have no freaking idea. If I were to give a hypothetical, I would say fall of 2027, which in my opinion is the best case. World Trigger having to go toe-to-toe with Kagurabachi next spring would be tough, knowing Bachi is the next global sensation. Though there is quality anime airing all year long, I'd rather it have the chance to stand out away from its titanic shonen peers. Granted, of course, it is what it is, but I think you all get what I'm trying to say. I also don't know yet how long this has been in production. Me personally, I believe they wanted to do this ever since season 2's opening reanimated the core events of season 1. It was in our faces the entire time, but in regards to when things really took off, that's a different story. I'm sure it'll come to light once the anime comes back, as production info has become a lot more readily available, with accessibility increasing over the last decade. With the help of a mutual, I was able to tune into the FanFest, and as the trailer announced, Black Trigger Retrieval is in production, so for the time being, all we can do is wait for some news at Jump Festa. And I have a feeling they will not be showing up without a little something. Now, at this point, I've said all that is reasonably out there, but how about some things to consider regarding expectations, long-term value, and what may be possible this go around? A lot of you all have commented that we should just get season 4, but in reality, this reboot is a blessing in disguise for Ashihara and us. While I am a huge fan of the sealed environment test portion, this arc is going to be a very interesting weekly reception abroad. Not to generalize, but to generalize, anime fans lack patience now more than ever. I do not think a season dedicated to what is going to be a primarily dialogue and character work heavy season is going to go over well with new fans unless we have the second portion of the test locked and loaded behind it. Given that we're still early in the battle portion, however, we need time for it to get deeper, and the reboot buys us that time. We need to be looking at the late game value. If we take into account the amount of time that Ashihara has left in this year, and then a potential 10-month wait if we're going along with the logic of a fall 2027 release, that's a potential 17 chapters give or take that he could put out in between now and then. Of course, with his health in mind and holidays, I'd say he will put out a total of 12, anticipating at least 5 breaks. Then you have to add on to the fact that the reboot will air alongside the manga, which will be pressing on. If we assume that the reboot will be 24 to 30-ish episodes, that's 24 to 30 weeks, which will be at least 6 to 8 more months. That's a good amount of potential manga content out by then, and that's some pressure off Ashihara's back as well, with the reboot going pretty strong. All of this is not taking into account that sometimes they may double drop. I say this all to say that this reboot gives Ashihara a very healthy amount of time to get deep into this battle portion, as at the time of this video, we're barely scratching the tactical surface. I don't know how long he plans to make it, but what I do know is that the more likely we can either include it in season 4 or have it locked and loaded for a 5th season, the better. I know how people can get about heavy dialogue seasons, and although it can filter people out, missing out on that second half would be absolutely criminal. Please keep in mind this is all just my personal opinion, but I think having the halves of the exam being able to be animated close to each other is as ideal as possible, and the farther the manga gets, the better our chances. All while keeping the World Trigger anime alive and well. Leading to another point regarding the reboot. We should expect the pacing to be fixed, and so I do have to wonder, will we be getting any additions in the content? With a lot of that time spent on dragging certain scenes out crunched down, I expect a lot of episodes to have different ending points in comparison to the original. But for those episodes that kinda really need to not go past a certain point for the sake of pacing, will we get certain new action sequences or interactions to productively fill the gap? More teamwork, animators flexing perhaps, characters doing things that we know they can do now that we didn't know back then. What if in the After Crater Invasion we get an extension on things like Yuma versus Visa, giving more display of the chaos within a Black Trigger battle? How about an anime original slaughterfest of Jin and Amo against a large neighbor army that were off-screened? We don't know if Ashihara has any direct involvement on this reboot, similar to how Kubo does on the 1000-Year Blood War, but nothing is worth writing off the table until all is said and done. I don't know how ambitious the plans are for the World Trigger staff, but the potential is really out there, and I'm curious to know what you all would like to see added this go around if there is room for it. Finally, let's talk about the potential opening and ending. Personally, I'm open to anyone for the ending for the reboot, considering we didn't exactly have one the first go around, but the OP is an interesting case. I may be in the vocal minority here, but personally, I would bring back Giri Giri and give it the fresh coating of visuals, or at least to close out the reboot on the final episode, play Giri Giri to close out the reboot heading into season 2. There is something about that song that really understands both the emotional angst of our characters and still supplies the classic shonen hype given the nature of the show. Would I appreciate them still having Sonar Pocket included in the reboot to some capacity? Absolutely, but I am not shutting out any artist either. We don't get a lot of sci-fi series, so I cannot say I am keen on just anybody picking up the mantle, but dare I say, I hope whoever steps up proves themselves. To close out, I want to simply say that regardless of what happens and what doesn't happen, there is is no way we as fans of the series lose with this reboot. It is the greatest win-win scenario we could have asked for, and I talked about this years ago around season 3's ending. It will boost the series at home and abroad, and with it being quite some time now since season 3, how could any of us be upset? All there is left to do now is maintain your enthusiasm for in Ashihara and the World Trigger staff we gotta trust. With that, ladies and gentlemen, will bring me to the end of this dose of rambling. As always, thanks for watching, and please let me know all your thoughts. I will be reading them piece by piece. Till then, I'll catch you all in the next one.